Okay, so today we're going to pick up talking about everybody's favorite book, back to Leviticus. You thought we were done, didn't you? Oh, no. There's like 28 chapters or so. No, my friend. We stayed in Leviticus chapter 1 for about a month, and you survived that. So, what's the worst that can happen? Chapter 1 talked about the first of 5 sacrifices that the Jews offered. It was called the burnt sacrifice. And the basic idea of it was to make a request from God. So if you were going to go into battle, you'd offer it for victory. If you needed forgiveness or healing, or if you were making an agreement with God or with somebody else sometimes, or if you just wanted to express thanks, the burnt offering was used in all these different things as you presented to God. But the problem is, I'm sure you guys stumbled upon it as we were going through, was the burnt offering to manipulate God into doing what you want and giving you what you were asking for? Or was it to honor him? And the answer is not quite so simple. It really depended on the person. And this was one of the big problems with the law, is that the law didn't actually fix the heart. If you came to the law with a bad heart, you could go through all the things, all the rituals, and you would look real good to people, but that didn't mean that you're actually offering a sacrifice from your heart. And that was one of the big faults there of the law. So then we get to Leviticus 2, and we get to what's called the grain offering. Now, the Jewish teachers referred to the grain offering as basically a poor man's burnt offering. So for that reason, chapter 1 and chapter 2 are kind of connected. And you're going to see at the end of chapter 2, it's going to talk about some stuff like with salt and different stuff that's going to apply to really all the sacrifices, but it's placed at the end of the chapter as these two sacrifices are more or less connected. So we get to chapter 2, verse 1. When anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, it is to consist of fine flour. He is to pour olive oil on it, put frankincense on it, and bring it to Aaron's sons, the priest. The priest will take a handful of fine flour and oil from it, along with all its frankincense, and will burn this memorial portion of it on the altar, a food offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But the rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It is the holiest part of the food offerings to the Lord. When you present a grain offering baked in an oven, it is to be made of fine flour, either unleavened cakes mixed with oil or unleavened wafers coated with oil. If your offering is a grain offering prepared on a griddle, it is to be unleavened bread made of fine flour mixed with oil. You guys, we're halfway through the 10 verses, okay? Just stay with me. Keep paying attention, all right? Break it into pieces and pour oil on it. It is a grain offering. If your offering is a grain offering prepared in a pan, it is to be made of fine flour with oil. When you bring to the Lord the grain offering made in any of these ways, it is to be presented to the priest, and he will take it to the altar. The priest will remove the memorial portion from the grain offering and burn it on the altar, a food offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But the rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It is the holiest part of the food offerings to the Lord. Gripping stuff. This is definitely what you want to read late at night when you're falling asleep, right? But there's a lot going on here. So I'm going to summarize just to kind of help you follow along with what's being said here, because it's kind of easy to just stop focusing. As I said, it's kind of easy to stop focusing. Who kind of zoned out a little bit when I was reading those 10 verses? Be honest. Okay, Danny? Huh? I was zoning out a little bit too. No, I'm just kidding. So let's summarize a little bit. This is the grain offering. There's no blood involved. So you would think that it wouldn't actually qualify as an offering at all. But yet it is. That's a conversation for another day, though. You could give it either cooked or uncooked. Verses 1 through 3 is cooked. Verses 1 through 3 is uncooked. Verses 4 through 10 is cooked. If it was uncooked, it was given with incense. The specific incense referred to is called frankincense. Those of you who are familiar with the story of Jesus, you're already pretty familiar with this. It comes from a rare tree that only grows in a certain area of the world. And so because of that, it is very pricey stuff. And you might ask, well, if it's so pricey, why is it included in the poor man's offering? Hold on, we'll get to that. Okay, just hold on. Don't get ahead of me. But either way, the frankincense was entirely burned. However, if the grain offering that you brought was cooked, you didn't bring any frankincense with it. And the question that I had Maybe you aren't asking this question. But the question I had when I read it is, why is that? And it seems like the reason why frankincense was not included in the sacrifice when it was cooked was because there was more effort involved. If you were just bringing the grain, there's a lot less effort than if you're preparing it, right? So you're preparing it, you give it to the priest doesn't have to do anything, he just kind of eats it. Well, if you don't prepare it, you give him this grain, it's like, gee, thanks, you gave me another chore. So the frankincense would then be to make up for the lack of effort. It seems. I could be wrong. If it was cooked, it could be prepared in any of the three ways it mentions, oven, griddle, or pan in verses 4, 5, and 6, and 7, respectively. But then there's a little bit of variation as far as how you cook it, but that more has to do with the means of cooking. There's nothing like some deeper hidden thing there. However, whether it was cooked or uncooked, it always had to be with olive oil. That's a standard in all of the grain offering. And olive oil was basically everybody's oil. Nowadays, it's the pricey stuff, right? Extra virgin olive oil is super expensive at the store. Well, that wasn't the case back then. Back then, everybody had it. There was no canola oil and all that. So this is pretty much the everyday person's thing. Now, whether it was cooked or uncooked, there was always a portion of it that was burned, and the priests always got the rest. That was always how it went with the grain offering. There was never any variation of that. Now, if you noticed, it said that it had to be made of fine flour. Now, this is a little bit confusing because you would think fine flour, you're thinking something real fine, right? Well, you're wrong. I had in my head all-purpose flour. You know, it's like dust. That's not what is going on here. It's actually not ground finely. It's the best of the best. So how you would get this, maybe a modern-day example would help you. Think semolina flour. Okay, kind of think of that, okay? For those of you who cook. If you don't cook, that probably means nothing to you. So they would take the wheat or the barley, and they would sift it. And then they would sift it again. And through this double sifting process, they would remove the chaff, they would remove the meal, and you were left with just the groats of the wheat. Now, does anybody here actually know what the groat is? No? Okay. See, this is exactly what I thought. Nobody knows these things. The groats is basically, and don't worry, I didn't know this either. You know how much research I had to find out what this nonsense was? The groats is basically the kernel. You take off the husk, and it's what's left. That's basically the groats. So they do this double sifting process to the wheat or the barley, and that lumpy bit there is the best of the best. That is what is referred to as fine flour. So it's a little bit of what is it called, misnomer or whatever, where the name sounds different than it actually is, where it's not actually smooth. It's actually very lumpy. So it's not the same as common flour. Let me kind of explain to you the difference here. I swear this is the last thing I'm going to say. We'll move on from the flour, I swear. The common flour is basically everybody's flour. You would just take it and you'd make it into flour, you'd make your bread, fine. Fine flour was more of the fancy stuff. It was used for special events, such as kings would eat fine flour. But if you were just going to Aunt Bertha's house, okay, she wouldn't serve you fine flour. She would give you just flour. Unless she really liked you, I guess. What am I getting at here? Oh, and then the other situation for when fine flour was used was for sacrifices. So it kind of, you would think, why is God requiring this? Keep in mind that if in the law God didn't require fine flour, it would have been like a slap in the face. Culturally speaking, they would have thought, oh, your God is not worthy enough for the fine flour. So in a certain aspect, it was expected to have the fine flour, just to show that, yes, God is worthy of the respect. So what if they couldn't afford the frankincense, which is the question I had? Well, there's two things I want to say about that. First off, it never actually says how much frankincense you have to include. So you could include whatever you could afford. The second thing about this is if you couldn't even afford the frankincense, you could just cook it anyways and just give the cooked portion to the priest. You didn't have to do the frankincense if you couldn't afford it. So there are ways through here. So what in the world does this have to do with us? This is great. 3,000 years ago, they offered a grain offering. Fantastic. What does any of this have to do with us today? Well, I swear it does, okay? Now, I was reading, some Bible teacher online was trying to make the point that the fine flour is representative of our worship So we have to give even and fine worship to God. And I was like, what? I mean, I kind of get what he was getting at, but no, because as I mentioned, the fine flour isn't actually ground up finely, so that doesn't really work at all, really. We could say something along the lines of how the priests and even their families were sustained by these people's contributions of grain. Yeah, we could say that, but that's not really the point I want to make today. We could also make the point that, when you make sacrifices, it should be the best that you can offer, but we kind of already covered that in chapter 1. So I think something we're going to draw from today is that God did not give one sacrifice for all of his people. This is extremely important. It was not a one shoe fits all. It was not that. Rather, God had a way of making a way for the poor. He did not require the same thing from everybody. He made a way for the poor. They didn't all have the same requirements in what they could offer. Let's backtrack to chapter 1. And no, we're not going to read it. Don't panic. You could offer a bull if you were really well off. Well, if you weren't as well off, you could offer a sheep. If you still weren't quite so well off, you could offer a bird. Now we've gone even lower to grain, and even cooked grain without frankincense. So, I mean, ultimately, it's not a one shoe fits all. It's something for everybody. And I think that same thing applies to us today. Some of us, have you noticed that some of us can just sacrifice a lot? You know what I mean? Let me give you some examples. In ministry, there are people who are always doing more. They're just always doing more and more and more. There's people who's always serving, and they're always going. See what I mean? And then there's other people, such as myself, who have a hard time with such a thing. You don't like being out talking to people all the time. You're just like, oh, I feel drained. I need to go rest and recover from this conversation. And you guys are looking at me like you don't know what I'm talking about, okay? The struggle's real, all right? Anyways, some of us sacrifice a lot in marriage. It seems like there's always that one partner in the marriage that's just super forgiving. You know what I mean? They're always working with you. They go out of their way to connect with you. They're always giving. I wish that I was that person naturally. I think I haven't figured out who it is in our marriage, but I don't know about Gracie, but for me, I really have to work hard at that stuff. I'd much rather just zone out and not talk and get back from work and just kind of leave me alone. It's very difficult to come, change my hats, connect with the kids, and connect with the wife. It's very difficult, very, very difficult. Maybe you guys don't have a hard time with this. I have a hard time with this. It does not come naturally to me at all. And some of us are just in life can sacrifice a lot, like being generous and serving. There's some people that every time you turn around, they're doing something for somebody else. Those people are just hats off to them. But then not everybody is that way. And so there's kind of two things I want to I'm getting at here. First off, some people sacrifice more, and for those people, it's very easy to get frustrated with others and to judge others. Very easy to do this. And it looks something like this. I'm more faithful. I'm a stronger Christian. They need to get their act together. They need to come to church more. You start feeling a little bit more superior. Has this ever happened to you? Don't raise your hand. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like, I kind of have a hard time because I'm always here at the church. I'm always doing something, and it seems like they're never doing anything. It can sometimes get frustrating for some people. And I think that sometimes... this isn't a rabbit trail. This is an attempt to make it apply more to just in ministry. Sometimes we also do this with our spouses. You know what I mean? Well, I'm kind of pulling all the weight. They should really, they need to do this. They need to start pulling their weight around here. If you're keeping track in your marriage, there's going to be a lot of conflicts in the future for you. In marriage, really, the greatest trick to staying married, I think, is just in being quick to forget the things that your spouse has done. I think that's probably the greatest thing that any of us could ever learn in our marriages. But maybe just limiting it to just our own marriage, I think, might be a little bit. We also do it with our kids' spouses too. For those of you who have kids that are married, you know what I'm talking about. Just make sure you're not inserting yourself into their marriage. Make sure you're not doing that. You know, if they're married, pray for them. Keep your fingers out of it. Like, there's got to be a point where tread carefully, and I'll just leave it at that. And two more things I want to say about marriage before we go on to the second thing here about the people who sacrifice more. Never complain about somebody else's spouse to them. Never do this. Never, ever, ever do this. Never go to somebody else and start bad-mouthing their spouse to them. Don't do this. If you don't have anything good to say, keep your mouth shut, honestly, for real. Matthew 18 tells us that if there is a grievance, go straight to the person, okay? Don't talk to somebody else about them. Go straight to the person. So if you have something to say about somebody's spouse, do not go to them and badmouth their spouse, okay? If you have something to say to the spouse, go to the spouse, okay? If it's something that doesn't need to be said, let it go. You know what I mean? There's got to be some kind of, and I think we do this with our kids too. You know, they get married, and maybe we don't like the person, or maybe we advise them not to get with the person, and they didn't listen because they got a mind of their own, as people do. And it's easy to say, well, you know, I told you this, and that's not overly helpful. You're trying to help build up your kids, and you want them to survive without you there. One of the big jobs of a parent is actually to equip your kids for when you're not there. You want to teach them how to be adults, right? You don't want them to always be dependent on you. You want them to be able to make decisions. And with that being said, one last thing here. Never talk to others about your spouse. Ooh. Never have something negative to say to others about your spouse. Don't do this. Don't. We'll move on from there, but, you know, so don't judge your sacrifice. The second thing here, it's easy to get frustrated. The second thing is, it's easy to feel worthless. This is the opposite side. So it's easy when you're committed to look at other people and say, you're not committed enough. Okay. But sometimes it's the other extreme. Sometimes it's easy to feel worthless. And that looks kind of something like this, where you feel inferior. Let me think of how to say this. No matter what I do, it's never going to be good enough. It seems like I'm always trying, I just can never measure up to this person. Oh, what's this person going to say about this? What's this person going to say? And it gets to be this kind of never-ending thing of making yourself feel weak and inferior and unworthy. And I found that the people who are most judgmental of others are people who are most insecure in themselves. And I know this sounds like Psychology 101, but it's true, legitimately. When you have people in a church context, when they are always trying to make you feel bad for your offering, for your sacrifice, it's never good enough. Well, you shouldn't do it like that. You should do it like this. Well, I saw what you did, but you really should have done this. And they're always doing that. And keep in mind that people who are going to be the ones constantly standing over your shoulder telling you about how it's not good enough are going to be people who are insecure. They have not found their trust in God. Okay, and it's very easy to do this. You get in a religious context, and it's easier to follow all the things and all the rules. But for that, I would say if you aren't extending grace to other people, the question is, how is your walk with God? I've noticed that when I'm not extending grace to other people in ministry, you know, they're doing a ministry and it's not good enough. I want to always criticize and nitpick it. I've noticed that it's usually there's something going on with my walk with God. See what I mean? Maybe I'm not reading my Bible like I should. Maybe I'm not praying like I should. Whatever it is, I've slipped into this kind of negative thing. And it's easy to get there, hard to get out. But God really doesn't look down on the efforts of others. And that amazes me because He's the one who has the right to. I mean, He does everything perfect. How much... In my mind, I'm thinking, well, if you do everything perfect, that gives you all the warrant to sit and criticize and nitpick everybody else, right? Because that's the big thing of why I tell myself not to, because I'm not perfect. I don't do it right. It's not my way or the highway. So with God, you would expect that He would have, well, since He is perfect, that everything, you know, He would just kind of do that, and He doesn't. He doesn't. He gives grace. And, you know, I think that He does that, and He expects us to follow in His steps. So with that being said, your efforts that you give to God, they're not second rate. God accepts it, He accepts you, and makes a way for you according to your ability. God knows what you're able to do. He knows what you're capable of doing. And he weighs your heart on those things. A couple examples. Those who can't give a lot. Not all of us are at the same financial level. Those who can't give a lot. Those who can't volunteer. Maybe work has you too busy, or maybe you've got poor health or whatever, and you can't volunteer. Those who are often too busy and they just can't fit their schedule. God still sees you and accepts the sacrifice that you do give. See what I mean? Oftentimes in church we hear about how it's not good enough, how you need to get your act together, you need to do more. But God is really the one who judges the efforts, and he knows what you're capable of and what you're not capable of. He's not going to judge you for not doing the same as somebody else. Okay? People will do that to you, but God doesn't. He judges you for your heart. Your heart. So God sees you, and he does accept the sacrifice that you give. Remember, though, with that being said, to stay faithful as you can and give as you can. I'm not just talking about money when I talk about giving. Sacrifice does still have to cost something, but keep in mind that God's looking at the heart, not the weight of the gold, if you understand. So when you have health issues, you have a job, you're emotionally spent. That's very common. We live in an emotionally spent culture, don't we? It's very hard not to always get drained. I mean, you go outside and there's bad news. Things are intense at work. Things are going on in the culture. It seems like everywhere you turn. And then to top off everything, we're in a voting year. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I want to talk about stress. Oh boy, oh boy. Maybe it's just me, but I get real stressed out about this time of. You would think it's every year, because I could have sworn we just voted, but I guess it's been 4 years, I guess. I'm doing the math here. Yeah, I guess it's been 4 years, but it feels like just yesterday, especially with the commercials on TV. Oh, man, oh, man, oh, man. It's easy to get emotionally spent, and for that, God sees. God sees. He sees when it's hard for you to get out of bed. He sees when you're in so much pain you're up half the night. He sees that. Okay, it's not something where you have to beat yourself over the head because so-and-so is doing better than you. It's not like that at all. It's not a competition, and I think this is one of our hardest areas to grasp onto here. It's not a competition between you and others. Okay? It's not a competition between you and how you used to be. Well, when I was a kid, I used to have so much more energy. You're not a kid anymore, unless you are a kid. When I did this, okay, yeah, but what about now? Well, that person over there, it's not a competition. You're not in competition with who you used to be. You're not in competition with other people. You can never measure up to them. People who have all these rules for you, let me just rip this Band-Aid off. You will never be able to measure up to their standards. Never. The more you cater to it, the worse it's going to be. I was talking with someone this last week, and I made the comment to them that, if somebody's going to talk about you, they're going to talk about you. There's nothing you can do about it. I think that the exact same thing holds true for this, In life, if somebody's going to gossip and complain about you, they're going to gossip and complain. That's just how it's going to be. There's nothing you can do to appease them. You might delay it, but eventually it's going to come. You'll never measure up to that. I know in my own life, the majority of my childhood as a Christian in the church was not good. It was one of trying to always be good enough to be accepted, always feeling unworthy, always feeling like no matter what I did, I wasn't good enough. And looking at my child self, I feel bad for me because it's silly. I got the gold medal of achievement in Royal Rangers. I went to National Fine Arts and placed on the top 10 numerous years in a row. I didn't get involved in drugs. I didn't have premarital sex. I never got involved with alcohol or anything. I never even smoked a cigarette in my entire life. I did good. But yet all I could see was how I wasn't good enough. And I think when you get in that kind of a rut of legalism, I think that no matter what happens, it's never going to be good enough. You'll push yourself harder, you'll push yourself. And the problem is, this is why I bring it up, because you're going to see God in the same skewed vision. You're going to see God as this tyrant over you that just nothing you do is good enough. He's just waiting to jump on you and tell you all the things you're doing wrong. And it's a very destructive mindset because that's not the true God. That's not the true God. So anybody who does anything will have people nitpick them. But God doesn't judge your genuine sacrifice. Now, when I was a kid, I did this thing. I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. I used to do this thing where I'm going to go ahead and do this thing I'm not supposed to, and then I'll just say sorry when I'm done, because God will forgive me. Not that anybody else ever did that. But I think we do the same thing with sacrifices. You know, we'll bring something and we'll say, well, you know what? I'm doing the best I can. No. I told this story a couple of weeks ago, or I guess maybe it was a couple months ago. I told this story about how I was cleaning the church and I was really doing the pastor a favor. But man, oh man, my attitude stunk. What kind of a favor is that? If you wanted someone with a bad attitude, you could have found a bunch of drug dealers to do that. Like, goodness sakes. There was a woman over in Tully that she was dying of cancer. And before she had cancer, she was very active. She was always at the different things, always volunteering. Well, then she got cancer. She couldn't as much because she was too tired, obviously. Cancer treatments really smack you upside the head. So she recovered from cancer. Full recovery, 0 cancer. So she got involved again. Well, then the cancer came back. Evidently in her middle, they call it middle age, but I guess it's not really middle age. Well, I'll just say in her younger years, her doctor had her on some medicine for long term that was supposed to be short term, and it caused a lot of problems with her. I forget what they're called right now, the lymphatic system. And so it spread, it got nasty, it was terrible in every way. And she got once again where she couldn't get up and go, and she always felt bad that she couldn't get up and go. And there were still some people, if you'll believe it, there were still some people who said, well, she could get up out of her bed, she could come to church. Well, that's one way of looking at it, I guess. But either way, through it all, she was a very strong prayer warrior. She was always in prayer. Up to the very end, the last weeks of her life, she would wake up in the middle of the night and pray for people. She was always praying for people. And that was something she could always do. Prayer is amazing in that way. What we do is we look at what somebody else is doing or what we used to do, and we say, well, how come I can't do that anymore? That's what I'm talking about. It's not a competition. It's not something where God's just waiting to beat you over the head. Over in Tularosa, I know a handicapped guy, wheelchair bound all his life, has kidney failure, has to go into dialysis a couple times every week. He's an associate pastor. God sees what you are able to do, not what you wish you could do, not what you used to do, or what you're able to do. And God judges you on that level. And I don't mean judge in a negative sense. I mean judge it in a positive sense. He doesn't weigh you down with it. So I mean that in a liberating way, if you will. I oftentimes can't do as much or as good as I'd like, and that frustrates me to no end because I'm not super old. I feel super old, but I'm not super old, and I still can't do those things. It's very frustrating. I want to be able, to get on my bike and bike however much I want to. Now, as it is, I get sick just doing the bare minimum stuff. I got to plan out my medicines just right. Man, oh man, I've become one of those people who sits around talking about stool all day and measuring out my medicines, So if you're over the age of 90, you and I have a lot of conversations that we can have. I think that's why me and Thurman got along so well, Yeah. He would sit there and he'd say, my old memory comes and goes. And I'd say, yeah, mine too. What are we talking about here? Thurman was a good guy. But I can't do the best. I can't do the best that somebody else can do. I can only do the best that I can do. And that's excellence. Excellence is not doing the best that somebody else can do. It's doing the best that you can do. Doing the best that you can do. And there's a big difference there. Paul tells us that he had a thorn in the flesh, that God refused to take it away. So many scholars believe this is something physical, some physical ailment that was a constant irritation or pain, depending on who you talk to. And I kind of side that way too. It seems like it's something physical, something that, God, if you just take this away, I'd be able to do more for you in ministry. Maybe I'm reading my own situation into that, though. Probably I am. Either way, God never took it away, and he still went faithfully into the things that he could do, not the things he couldn't do. And, I think that that's something that we're all in danger of. I do want to give a warning, though, before we close out here. Okay? So, we're all on the same page here that it's not our place to sit over somebody else and say that they're not doing a good enough job in the church, right? It's also not our place to go and feel like we're lower than the worms, right? Right? We're all good with that? Okay. Last thing I want to say here is a little bit of a warning. Never sacrifice your family on the altar of ministry. Whatever you do or don't do in the church, make sure that you keep the right set of priorities. God comes first. That's your walk with God. I know a lot of pastors, our spiritual life is dead and gone, and we're spending all of our energy pouring into other people, and we don't have anything in us. Many of my pastor friends, they get behind in their devotional life, in their prayer. They get behind in their Bible reading. They're always talking to other people about praying and reading their Bible. They just kind of fall short themselves. And I'm not talking about them, something they do. This is something us pastors do. I already told you guys, I think it was last Sunday or Wednesday, somewhere in there, I told you guys about how I am now playing catch-up from May's Bible reading. I've been having to do 2 days of Bible reading at least every day to get on track by the end of June, if I counted it right, so that I'll start in July being back where I'm supposed to be. It happens, But make sure that you don't sacrifice your family on the altar of ministry. If you have to choose between volunteering for something or being there for your wife and kids, be there for your wife and kids. If you have to choose, always choose family first. God, family, ministry. Ministry cannot be exalted over your family. And I'm not in ministry. Okay, all right. Don't put work over your family. Whatever it is, remember that everything in life costs something. You have to sacrifice for everything. Okay? You can sacrifice your family for your work or your work for your family. You can't have both because we are limited beings with limited time. If you have to choose, always choose your family over your ministry, over your work. Always. Always. I have no problem with people stepping down from a ministry because they're just not giving their family the time that it should be. I have no problem with that. Actually, a couple years ago, a friend of mine here in New Mexico was a lead pastor and had to step down from pastoring and hand it off to somebody else because he couldn't do it anymore with his family. And no judgment here. I totally get it. Ministry takes a lot of work. Anything really takes a lot of work. And you got to always, keep that priority right because you're going to have to choose. If you'll join me in prayer, please, bury your head and close your eyes. We're going to pray for 3 different people. And we're going to have them all come up at the same time so you don't have to feel like you're out of place. First off, if there's anyone with any kind of a need whatsoever, you need healing or you just need, God to speak to you or whatever, if you come up. The second group is anyone who just is struggling and needs encouragement. And the third group is anyone who you just feel like you're really having a hard time with a judgmental, jealous, or prideful attitude. It's really just hard for you to not look down on other people. Any of those 3 groups, we're going to open up the altar call. As you come up, we're going to pray for you, and then we're going to deal with the grads afterwards. But Lord, I just pray you'd touch our hearts and help us to seek you, help us to put you first. Lord, I just pray you to encourage and you guide and direct, that you would be an ever-present help. Lord, I pray that you'd reach and touch where nobody else, no words can and nothing else can, Lord. That you do a work that's greater than we could ever even imagine. If you need prayer for anything that I mentioned, come on up. We're going to pray for you. If you need healing or anything, we're going to open up the altars, and we're going to pray for you.